Sewing sense, machine parts. Will you know all your parts before your test drives? So the most important thing to remember about your sewing machine is you want to make sure it's plugged in so that when you start to try to sew, you have some power. You'll know this first by checking the cord at the bottom. Then you want to check on the right-hand side of the machine, pictured here, this particular knob. Right now it's in the off position. As you'll notice, it is turned to a 0. You can then turn it on by rotating it up to on, or to the last position, which is probably where you're going to want it all the time, on with a light, so that you can actually see what you're doing. Also on this right side of the machine is a particular part that you will be required to identify, and that is very important to you. That is your hand wheel. You'll notice it's right here. If you turn the hand wheel away from you while you're sitting at the sewing machine, that will move the needle up and down and pull the fabric away from you through the feed dogs, which we'll get to in a moment. If you turn it towards you in a counterclockwise motion, that will reverse, and that'll bring your stitches backward. It's a really good idea to use this tool to either move forward or backward when you want to go slow, when you're turning a corner or you're just starting to get familiar with the machine. So it's important to remember that you have to be able to identify all of the parts of our school sewing machines before you're allowed to actually sew on them with thread. Okay, so now I'm going to start on the front of the machine with most of the basic parts that you will also be required to know. And there are a lot here, so try and keep in mind that you'll be practicing with many of these. And it's important to know them so that you are familiar with the direction that I may give you if I'm not able to help you because I'm across the room, and you might be able to troubleshoot something yourself. So I'm going to start here at the bottom right. Okay, see where the pointer is? And this is the stitch length selector. Okay, you'll notice you see stitch lengths 0 to 5. A common stitch is stitch number 3. That's an average length. You would change this, although they'll be preset, by turning this particular knob, and you will see the line go up or down. You would use 5 for a basting stitch, and you would then use 1 or 2 for a small decorative stitch. For our purposes, we're going to keep it at 3. This particular machine, this knob is also the lock stitch or the reverse stitch button. What you would do is not twist the knob, but pull it up to the top of this rectangle, and that will allow your needle and your feed dogs to reverse stitch by you operating the foot pedal or the gas of the machine, which we'll get to here in a moment. Alright, so moving up the machine, we're going to look at this particular knob. It's at the top right, and this is the stitch width selector, how wide it is. If you take a look over here to the direct right of the knob, you see a zigzag, and you also see needle position, and I'll go over needle position here in a moment. Okay, if you look real close, the dial, the gray portion around the stitch width selector, is set to 0. That's going to keep our stitch width at a straight stitch, one stitch after the other, similar to what this looks like here in our stitch length selector. If we were to move this to one of the other numbers, 1 through 5, it would change the pattern of the stitch to a wider width zigzag. And we don't want to do that for our purposes. We're going to keep it here at 0 so that our sewing stitches and lines are nice and straight. You would move the needle position. If you take a look over here, the needle is in the direct center, and we want to keep that in the center. But sometimes we need to move the needle over depending on the type of stitch that we are doing, and you would do so by moving this particular front cream colored knob to the right, left, or to the center. All right? But as I said, we will not be doing that for this particular machine. Real quick, a couple knobs that I want to bring to your attention. By no means are you supposed to touch during sewing, are the two here that I have circled. All right. This particular one is a buttonhole machine. We will not be using buttonhole machines for our sewing project for that function. That will create a button if you were sewing a t-shirt or something like that. This bottom one down here also has to do with a certain stitch length and width, and that is for an embroidery type of stitch, and we will not be doing that. So make sure you stay clear of those so that they don't get bumped and possibly create a problem or a mistake in your sewing project. Okay, moving over to the left front of the machine, we're going to be looking at the thread guides. And these are important to pay attention to because this is what guides your thread from the top of the machine to the spool pin, which we'll look at here in a moment. Down the front, it keeps correct tension so that your thread doesn't break or become too loose, and it guides it down to the needle. All right, first you would see this particular one right here. And that is the first thread guide on the front of the machine. It looks very similar to a spout or an old-fashioned hand pump. All right, and it comes through, you can see, it comes right down through here. The thread will then continue down to the bottom of the second thread guide and then back into the third before traveling down towards the needle. What you want to make sure of is that you kind of take a look beforehand and double check to make sure that the thread has gone into the correct area so that it isn't somehow misfed through one of these guides. If it does happen to get fed, it will break. And very often we will then get thread into the inner portions of the machine and it becomes a problem and it won't hold correct tension. All right, so continuing, we're going to stay here at the top. A couple things about the spool pin here. Okay, there are two metal spool pin holders here in the back, and that's where your spool of thread is held, and it will continue here, as I said on the previous slide, down through the thread guides and then to the thread take-up guide. Okay, but what I'm going to focus on here is what you would do if you are going to take your bobbin through and you have to wind your bobbin. All right, so the spool of thread would come back through here and around this particular pin right here, and then back around the front to where your bobbin would be. This is the bobbin winding pin. You would manually take the bobbin winding pin over, okay, it'll just slide right over, and then you would either use the foot pedal or the hand wheel to start spinning your bobbin in a clockwise motion so that it is full of thread. Remember that when you actually are sewing, you have two pieces of thread that are interlocking. The top portion, which comes, as I just showed you from here, the thread guide, and then down to the needle, which we'll look at closer here in a moment, and then the other one that comes up from the bobbin case, which we'll look at in a future slide. So this is the back view of the spool pin where the spool of thread is held. Sometimes you have one a little farther away depending on how thick your thread is and the tension that it needs. And if you take a look here, this is what I just took you through. If you were to wind your bobbin, you'd be taking it around this pin and then back to the spool pin, which is actually blocked by the spool of thread. Also, take notice here in the back of the machine is the presser foot lifter. You really want to make sure you know what that is because that is how you control the presser foot when it is up or down. It's always going to be taken down when you want the presser foot keeping pressure so that you can actually start sewing. And then you lift it back up as it is now in the up position when you need to possibly pivot with your needle down to turn a corner, or when you're done sewing and you need to take the thread and the fabric off of the machine. Quickly, another top view of the machine. As you can see, here are your spool pins again, both the first one and the second one. Okay, then you can also see the bobbin winding pin, and this is what I was talking about manually, that you would take this and slide it over when you actually want to spin the thread around the bobbin. Right here you will see some different decorative stitches. This is when you can see all these different designs here. This is when you have something special that you're designing. Right here would be embroidery stitches as decorations on the outside of a project that you're working on. And right here you can see these are more zigzags. These are special stitches for different types of clothes when you have to turn a tight round sleeve or a waistband or something like that. We will not, absolutely not, be working with any of these. So you want to make sure that you don't touch any of this. You can see they're all right here as a straight line, and that's what we're going to be using and keeping for our projects. The last thing I want to draw your attention to at the top of the machine before we move down here to the actual needle, throat plate, feed dog area is this right here. And this is the tension control. Right now you can see this dial is set at a red line. That's tension control setting 5. I don't know if you can see, but there's a little number 4 and a little number 6 underneath. And the tension determines how tight the thread is released from the spool pin and down to the thread guides and the thread take-up guide, and as it's threaded into the needle and the bobbin case is allowing thread to come up, it just determines how tight that is. Most of the time you would keep it at 5 because that's going to be a normal stitch. If the tension is too tight, you're going to see that the stitches are kind of curling up on your fabric. If you have thicker fabric, you need something tighter. If you have real slippery fabric or delicate fabric like silk, then you want a looser tension. When the needle pierces through the fabric, it could cause a rip or a tear if the tension is too tight. Again, we're going to keep ours right here at the 5. So something you may not have seen before was when we took our thread through the thread guides and through the thread take-up, we brought it down this way and then I just used an arrow. The last thread guide that you would take it through is right here. You have to take it in behind there, and what you do is as you're coming and bringing your thread down, you will loop it in behind this right here. And the purpose of that is to keep it nice and straight as it continues down and then needs threaded through your needle. Okay? You can't see it, I'll show you in another slide, but right here on the presser foot is a small little dash hole that you would take the piece of thread through, and then it would wind in behind, and you want it to keep back in there so that it doesn't tangle up. Okay, so again, major things that we're looking at here is the last of the thread guides, of course the needle, and the big major important, your presser foot. Okay, the presser foot level is back in here, behind here where I showed you before, and it goes down. Goes down when you want it to lock down onto the feed dogs. Okay, and then it'll reverse back up when you'll lift it back up when you want to bring your needle up and when you want to pull your fabric off. So we're back to the front view of the presser foot throat plate area. This box right here, that's called the throat plate, and you'll notice that it has a lot of lines on it, and those are in intervals of 1/4 inches, and those are what you use to guide your fabric as it is sewing away from you, so that you keep a nice straight stitch line and so that you have the correct seam allowance. Also looking here, as before, we have the presser foot, and as I had shown you before, the thread is moving down into the needle, it's threaded through, and then it is placed here in this line so that it's back and out of the way. Right now this presser foot is in the down position. That means the presser foot lifter back here in the back of the machine was taken down so that the mechanism here that you see completely takes it down on top of the feed dogs, which are the zigzag feeders underneath the presser foot. Once again, here is another side view of your presser foot throat plate area. You can see a much better feed dog view here. Remember, they rotate back when you're moving forward, and they rotate forward towards your body when you're going in reverse stitch. And that seems opposite. Once you actually see the fabric underneath here and moving through, it makes a lot more sense. You also notice that the presser foot is in the up position. Remember that presser foot lifter back here was moved up. That's in the back of the machine where you can't see it. And that allows you to lift your fabric off and to snip it if you are done sewing, or as I said before, if you need to put your needle down with the hand wheel and lock a place so that you can pivot fabric to turn a corner. Also notice that the thread coming up here through the bobbin case is right here and out the back of the machine with the top spool pin thread. Alright, the bobbin case area, you see we lifted the door down here, and that normally rises back up and it's all flat white. Right in here underneath the throat plate, when the needle comes down into the throat plate, into the feed dogs, there's a small hole here, and it comes down and it interlocks the top thread with the bobbin bottom thread, and that causes that interlock stitch which keeps your two pieces of fabric together. Now, in earlier slides I went through the top of the machine and how you would wind the bobbin, and then you would place the metal bobbin into this bobbin case. And you have to make sure that this little arm is up and it's also the thread is moving in a clockwise motion. Then you would have to make sure that the thread comes down and catches that loop and pulls it up so that you have the two pieces of thread underneath the feed dogs and the presser foot together. This can be very tricky. This is a place where a lot of times threads will get tangled and caught, and it creates a lot of bad stitching on your fabric, and we have to get the seam ripper out. A lot of times I will already have this pre-wound for you, and then I've got the machines all threaded in this area ready to go. If you have any problems where you are sewing and the needle comes down and it gets really tight and it locks, it means there's an issue with thread that is wound inside of this bobbin case and is trying to be pulled up, and it's gotten tangled. And a lot of times you can't see that because it's going on right underneath here, the feed dogs, where you can't see it. The machine will sound weird, like it's groaning. It'll be going very slow. In the event that the needle sometimes bends or breaks, you will hear odd sounds. It's not the normal hum of the sewing machine. If that's the case, stop. Okay, we can very often ruin the machine, and a lot of times if I get to it, I've seen it enough times that I can easily untangle it, or the machine is just having a rough day and it needs a timeout. So it's best that, unless you have a lot of practice with our machines, which some of you do, that you take time and you wait for me and I can come troubleshoot for you. You are allowed to open up this bobbin case door and possibly see if you can see any tangled threads, and that'll kind of give me a better idea of what I need to do to help you when it's your turn. Last but not least, the part that all of you are most interested in, the foot pedal. So the foot pedal is what we call the gas pedal, the acceleration of the machine, and you operate it very similar to how you would a gas pedal in a vehicle. You press down. The harder you press down towards the floor, the more gas you're giving the machine. So if you are a brand new driver, if you've never been on a sewing machine before, slower is better. Normally, you'll see that there are two cords here, one that is giving power to the foot pedal, and then it goes up to the machine, so that's what communicates, and then the actual power cord to the machine. So both of these cords then lead to the power plugs on the floor that you can't see. Earlier, when I started this presentation, I reminded all of you to make sure that the machine is plugged in. Sometimes this plug or the actual prong plug on the floor in the power plugs, they get unplugged. They wiggle out, they get kicked, whatever may happen. And you'll say, Mrs. Marteeny, my machine isn't working. And I'll ask, is it plugged in? And a lot of times that's the quickest, simplest fix. Again, I caution you, if you are new to the machine, go slow. Slower is better. And you'll hear that in the hum of the machine. So that is your last machine part. Good luck on your machine parts test. Remember, you need to pass in order to start your test drive.